everyone's input, everyone's thoughts, everyone's ideas. As you know, the last 10 years, we've seen a big change, so we can imagine with the projects we know of moving forward, there'll be even bigger changes and transformations to the city. So I want to thank the steering committee, which was made up of stakeholders, planning board members, and council for guiding this endeavor, and all of you, thank you, and that's it. Let's get started.
Thanks for coming, folks. There we go. I'm going to introduce the team here. My name is Michael Sullivan. I'm a principal with Clark Caton Hintz in Trenton, New Jersey. We're an architecture, planning, and landscape architecture firm, and we've been engaged to facilitate the preparation of a re-examination report for the master plan pursuant to the city's RFP. With me tonight is Beth McManus. She's the project manager for this, and we're lucky to have her. She's one of our most up-and-coming young professionals in our firm. I may be rehashing things that you may have heard if you've been to other of the public meetings, but I'm going to refresh everybody's memory. What a master plan re-examination is really a to-do list for your master plan and your zoning ordinances. And it's a way for you to look back and see what you've done in your past master plan, and then to identify things that you would like to do in the future. It's not the master plan itself, although this will serve substantially towards that, but it sets the stage so that you can develop regulations for land use and zoning and master plan land use policies from that. Within the scope of our project, we are going to address 10 subject areas, and these are related to the municipal land use laws definition of what a master plan is. It provides for different elements and things like that. So we are going to build a section that talks about vision and goals, which are the overarching parts of the master plan, and that will feed the other elements. Land use, which is really the way to control your zoning. Urban design, which is going to talk about the form and the function of the city. Parking and circulation, which is one of the biggest, we found is one of the biggest issues facing the city right now as more popularity grows with people coming down to eat and to live and to work here. Housing, we're going to be looking at housing in a way that tries to look for ways to accommodate a range of housing choices. Economic development, what are the things that are going to drive some of these things in terms of business? Historic preservation, there's a rich history of architecture and activity and land use within Asbury Park, and so we're going to be looking at that. Open space, parks, lakes, and recreation. These are fundamental pieces of your infrastructure within which the city functions, and they're a complement to the developed areas, so we're going to be looking at those. Sustainability, and this is a word that's very general. Sustainability can mean lots of things. It can mean, you know, alternative energy, alternative transportations, building materials, orientation, and how you treat your stormwater runoff and your water infrastructure. And then finally, community facilities, places like this, fire, police, community buildings, how those are dealt with. I already mentioned the steering committee. It's planning board, council, residents, and business owners are all represented. Just so you understand, we're the consultants, so we do this in lots of places, but we're doing it for you, but we don't live here all the time. So we have a steering committee that's going to talk to us and help us understand the input we're hearing, and to help us develop ideas from that input and filter these things and shape them into what the final document would be. What we've been doing, this isn't the first meeting we've had. This process actually started with a kickoff discussion about the structure and the timing of things back last summer. In the fall, we did research, which meant a review of all your planning documents and your land use regulations to the best we could do. We vetted those with the steering committee to make sure we were understanding these regulations and policies. And then we began community engagement in the winter. We had stakeholder meetings, and then we began community meetings. Right now, you can see the red. That's where we are now. It's summer 2017. We're now addressing the preliminary findings and recommendations, and we're vetting those with the community and asking for more input. Subsequent to this meeting, we're going to have 2 planning board meetings at which there will be a draft re-examination report issued. The community will have a chance to provide input at both planning board meetings and prior to through the portal that the city establishes on its website. Once the draft is accepted by the planning board, they'll have a hearing on it, and then that will be the final report once it's adopted, and we anticipate that to happen in the fall. We've had 5 stakeholder input meetings, and that included city officials like police, fire, transportation, economic development initiators, Chamber of Commerce, developers, iStar was in the room, a couple other smaller developers, and businesses and community groups. We had 5 of those meetings, and that gave us detailed information about what those sectors of interest would want in this document. So far, this is our 3rd community input meeting. If you attended the 2 previous, they were different format. What we did was we had basically, we had one over on Springwood, and we had one over in the single-family area in the church, in the residential area. And the format was different. It was really a focused, it gave people a focused opportunity to do like a planning policy speed dating, where we set up different stations with different people. And you were able to look at the documents and give your input in a detailed way where you could go step by step and engage each one. But you weren't required to engage every one. So some people were really interested in lakes, so they focused on the sustainability. And some people were interested in land use, so they focused on land use. We have had 2 of those. The format tonight, this is our 3rd meeting, is going to be a presentation of the preliminary information that we've gathered, the preliminary directions that we're getting from the steering committee, and then we're going to ask you to comment. There's a microphone back there. We're going to take down your comments. There's note cards that you may have picked up, so that if you think of something later or you don't get a chance to speak because we run out of time, we don't know how much, we think we're going to have 2 hours plus. But you'll have a chance for that, and then subsequently through the website, portal, email. Subsequent to tonight, there'll be 2 planning board meetings. So we'll have a total of 5 community input meetings through this process, in addition to the stakeholder meetings. Oh. Part of this exercise involved a study, a separate study by a subconsultant to us, Forward Planning, who looked at demographic and labor trends in order to inform the economic development, housing, and things like that. And one of the key points that was determined is that the population is increasing in the senior realm, 55 and older, which means there's fewer children here, more people staying longer who are older or coming who are older. There's a demand for rental housing of all types. There's a demand for retail space. And there's a need to enhance affordable housing options, and that doesn't mean just affordable in the classic sense, but also at levels between low income and luxury housing. There's a need to enhance transit opportunities to leverage those for economic development, and that there is a general growth in healthcare and technical services that's happening in this region that could be taken advantage of. The big ideas that we've heard so far through our stakeholders and our community meetings is that there needs to be a promotion of arts and culture of the city, and this is really the heart of how Asbury Park became Asbury Park, through arts and culture. An enhancement of the safety on the streets in terms of sidewalks and lighting, a reduction in the negative impact of entertainment activities, and I assume that means bars and music, that there's, despite how much fun everybody has, the fun doesn't stop when they leave the venue. So how do we do that? And that may be some way to manage that through the master plan and zoning, as well as operational issues. Improvements in bike and transportation and pedestrian infrastructure, the sidewalks, making sure there's connectivity, calming traffic, improving parking availability. We just had a big powwow last week to talk about how to do that with the engineer in the city and the transportation planner. Upgrade Asbury Avenue as a gateway. It comes down from Route 35. How do we make that happen? enhance the parks, the lakes, and the open spaces, not just from a park standpoint and a use standpoint, but from a functional standpoint in terms of the health of these spaces. Make sure that they're sustainable, make sure that they're managed well. Improve housing and code enforcement, that's sort of down and dirty. Expand affordable housing opportunities, and this is something that's very important, not just here, but in lots of places. Affordability in New Jersey is getting tougher and tougher, and it's highlighted in places like Asbury Park, where you have such a high demand in real estate and values increasing so quickly. Expand job opportunities and economic development, so we're looking at those and seeing what land use barriers and zoning barriers there are to increasing those. And there's an acknowledgement that the character is changing the waterfront. I think that's part of the waterfront redevelopment plan, is the character will change. But how to maintain the essence of the city through those changes and make sure that all this is functional. And finally, this is one, not surprisingly, that came from the developers, is they want the development process to be simpler and clearer and more streamlined so that they can get projects moving faster, presumably so they can build more housing and more retail and the things that folks need. I'm going to let Beth take over for this section of the talk, and she's going to go over a little bit more of the detail of the recommendations that we've gotten and that are evolving through the interaction with the steering committee and the input we've gotten. And I want to emphasize, these are draft recommendations. These are preliminary thoughts. And through the public process, we're going to refine these with the steering committee so that they become actionable direction in your master plan and in your land use ordinances. So I'm going to hand it over to Beth. Here's the pointer.
There we go. There are some benefits to being short. So good evening, everybody. As Michael said, my name's Beth McManus. I'm thrilled to be here tonight, and I'm going to run through the recommendations, the preliminary draft recommendations that have been developed thus far. And while we have a number of recommendations, I'm going to try to hit the highlights and the big ideas to get everybody familiar with the direction that this reexamination report is going. And we're going to stick to the 9 topics. There were 10 topics that this master plan is going to address generally, but 9 of them are substantive topics. The other one is vision and planning goals, and that is in part going to be finalized based on what we hear this evening. So we're going to start with land use, move on to urban design, transportation, community facilities, and so on. And so the first one, of course, is land use. And with that,
just land use is like the big toe of the master plan.
Yes.
it's the biggest element. It's the one you have to have. So that's why it goes first.
Yes. So the first recommendation is it's really quite simple. You have a zoning map that's been in place for many, many years, and over time there have been a number of nonconformities that have been developed in your residential districts and your commercial districts. And so our recommendation is to simply take a look at these zoning boundaries and make sure that they properly reflect your existing and your desired conditions. So where you have a number of homes located in a commercial district, for example, that exists in your neighborhood commercial district on Asbury Avenue, let's revise that zoning district so that those existing single-family homes are permitted uses where they are. And so that, in that example, those homes would go from the commercial district to the residential district. And there are a variety of small examples throughout the city in ways that will recommend that you tweak your zoning map to create more consistency for your existing and your desired land uses. Sorry, there we go. The next recommendation is to modernize your B2 or your Main Street commercial district. And essentially, this recommendation is to update the zone district, this B2 district, to create a requirement that buildings be located close to the street in order to promote walkability and enjoyment of Main Street as you walk down street, so the buildings are close. You're not faced with a parking lot on either side and the street on the other side. We're also recommending encouraging retail uses, so prohibiting office spaces, new office space to be developed within your B2 district, so you get that concentration of active commercial, retail, restaurant uses. Additionally, we're going to recommend that auto rental uses be limited to other portions of the B2 district, mainly along Memorial Drive, where that character is a bit different than what you see along other portions. Additionally, we'd also recommend that you permit artist live-work uses. As Michael said, one of the overall themes for this re-examination report is going to be to promote art and culture within Asbury Park. And so you'll see ideas intended to promote arts and culture peppered throughout this presentation, throughout all the topics, and this is just the first example. We want to create additional places for artists to live and for them to conduct their work. Our next topic is about the NC, or the Neighborhood Commercial District. In this district, as you can see, it's highlighted in purple on this map. It's along Asbury Avenue, as well as a little bit on Springwood down towards the south. And one of the things we'd like to do is expand the permitted retail uses to allow for additional types of retail, daily services, convenience services that folks would find useful and that might be inclined to walk to downtown to these areas. We also want to permit, in addition to new retail uses, new personal services. So if you think of things like places for getting your hair done, for cleaners, things along those lines. Again, looking for other opportunities for artists to live and work. So we're recommending artist live work studios be located in these zone districts. And then lastly, we'd like to promote greater mix of uses down in these places. More specifically with mixed use, with retail or those personal services on the first floor and residential units above. And so we're recommending that developers be offered incentives to combine these uses so that you can create more density in these areas. And that density is important because it creates, or it gives the opportunity for more people to be within walking distance and convenient location of the retail and the shops within these areas. And so essentially there's a greater captive audience or convenient customers for the uses within this NC district along Asbury and Springwood. Our next zone that we'd like to address is the LI. This is the Light Industrial District. And of course you can see it highlighted in the zoning map on the screen in gray, generally off of Memorial Avenue, although a variety of the side streets in this area, the western portion of the city as well. The district permits a number of retail and office uses, and what we'd like to do is to better target this district, those areas of LI, for light industrial uses, so that you can begin to better concentrate your retail and your services to other areas of the city, places that folks are more akin to walk to bike to for those activities, but also to allow for like uses to be concentrated within this part of the city. Another aspect of arts and culture is we also think that the LI district would be a nice place to permit recording studios. This is a use that certainly supports your music scene in Asbury Park, but it can have negative neighborhood impacts because, of course, it's the nature of it. It can create a lot of noise, and so the LI district creates a nice opportunity for folks to have these recording studios in a place that are both convenient to the neighborhoods but also a bit away from them, so that they can practice without so much concern for the neighbors. And again, we'd also like to permit art studios in this location. The LI district presents a great opportunity for not only your traditional art studios like painting and sculpture, for example, but also those artists that are working with other materials, thinking about perhaps metalwork or woodwork, art uses that are certainly important to the art scene but have some potential negative impacts to neighboring uses. Also within the LI district, we're looking to create an overlay district that would create additional opportunities for new types of development. And so while we want to see opportunities for light industrial uses to concentrate and to flourish within Asbury Park, there's also a recognition that these uses, not only in Asbury, but also in New Jersey and nationally, are struggling. And so one of the trends that we see throughout the state is redevelopment of former light industrial uses. And so we'd like to create opportunities for those uses that are those buildings that are no longer viable to be redeveloped into a mix of uses, so a mix of commercial and a mix of residential uses.
Just to pick up on that, one of the things that we found early on, and we talked about it, was the lack of affordable housing and housing like that. And one of the things that we're really not struggling with, but trying to find the solution for is where do you have the potential for change and growth in that respect. You know, are you going to go into your historic neighborhoods and build, you know, mid-rise buildings? Well, no, but it may be more acceptable within these industrial areas where it's done sensitively to the adjacent residences and also interfacing with the industrial. So that's why we're looking at that in terms of an overlay, because we feel like there's a great capacity for change there, and that wouldn't be necessarily detrimental to any particular existing residential or commercial neighborhood.
Also, one of the things we did was we took a look at your existing PO or professional office district, and these are the pink areas highlighted on the map here. And while these areas permit a number of office uses as well as some other residential uses, what we find is that they're predominantly occupied with residential and some institutional uses. And so the recommendation is to eliminate these districts in favor of the R1 district, which is the yellow district right here to the east. And so an expansion of the R1 district to encompass these lots to essentially better reflect what the existing and the likely future uses are for these areas. There we go. And so, of course, we have a series of recommendations specific to arts and culture. One of the first things that we'd like to recommend is that the city consider creating an arts district. And this is something that's been talked about from just about every stakeholder group that we spoke with. They talked about the need to really promote arts and culture. And the idea at this point is, while arts is certainly welcome and exists throughout all of Asbury Park's commercial districts, Asbury Avenue creates a really unique opportunity because this is an area that could benefit from some revitalization, some redevelopment in different parts, and arts and culture can really be used as a vehicle to expedite that redevelopment and that revitalization by introducing new uses and potentially offering incentives for creating those new uses. But in order to further support arts and culture throughout the city as a whole, we're recommending a plan to address the topic. And that plan would address not only things like the location of an arts district and the type of zoning that should be addressed, but it would also address other ways to incorporate art within the city. So thinking about installation guidance, so if there is public sculpture or murals, how should the city decide what's an appropriate location? How should it view the artwork? Should it be based on a committee review, so on and so forth? An arts plan can properly address that. Also, the plan could address programming, so if you think about how some of your open space, your public spaces are used, the arts plan can address some appropriate ideas for arts programming, whether it's art theater uses, art activities for the public, and so on. And then lastly, of course, policy. So those zoning implications, what types of arts and culture uses are appropriate? Are, for example, music halls and theaters appropriate in all of Asbury Park? Well, probably not, but an art plan can help really target those places where music is appropriate, where art studios are appropriate, and so on. We'd also like to recommend that the city modernize its land use regulations, and that's a pretty broad statement, but ultimately the city's ordinance has been in place for decades, and so this re-examination report presents an opportunity for not only our team at Clark Caton Hins, but also working with the steering committee and city planners to identify locations within the zoning ordinance that are really in need of improvement. So, for example, there are definitions that are perhaps unclear. There are words within the ordinance used, permitted uses and so forth, that are not well defined. And so this is an opportunity to identify some of those definitions that need to be improved. Also, an opportunity to identify and start to eliminate conflicts within the ordinance. There are sections that might regulate, for example, home occupation one way, and that's a conflict with another portion of the ordinance. And so there are a variety of examples throughout the ordinance that we'd like to identify in this re-examination report and put on your to-do list, so to speak, for addressing in the future.
And just so you know, Beth's being very kind about the ordinance. As you know, we're the Board of Adjustment planners, so we're reviewing plans and the ordinances every week, and man, it really needs to be overhauled. So
that's true.
Good suggestion.
So also, we'd like to create some better lighting standards. There are no no lighting standards that we can really use to judge a site plan against. And this is important not only from an environmental aspect, but from also a safety aspect. From safety, you want to make sure that you've got adequate lighting so that people feel comfortable and safe going from a building to a car at night, or perhaps walking along the street. But also from an environment standpoint, you want to make sure that you're not overlighting an area, you're not creating sky glow, you're not having a light shine into a neighbor's property, that there's no glare. And so this re-exam is going to be an opportunity to make that recommendation to upgrade your lighting standards. And similarly, your planting and your buffer standards, these two also need to be upgraded. There are new ways of thinking about how plants should be installed, upgraded ways to consider how plants should be used to buffer between incompatible uses. And so this is, again, an opportunity to upgrade those standards.
Right. And there's also a great sensitivity to the coastal environment here when it comes to plant selection, particularly street trees. There's no street trees along Ocean Avenue, but when you build high-rises, you can fit, not high-rises, but higher buildings that block some of the wind. So looking at the microclimate and how that might affect it, we think that there's some good policies that should be implemented there so that you have viability in your plants and you're not replacing some dead tree every 5 years.
The next recommendations have to do with housing. The first one on our miscellaneous list is to regulate short-term rentals. We heard about concerns from short-term rentals, and when I say short-term, I'm thinking about things like Airbnb, Home Away, VRBO. These services I think most folks are familiar with. And so we actually heard a variety of comments about this topic, both folks that were in favor of really limiting them very strictly and those that felt that they were good for the neighborhood. But there's a balance that needs to be struck, and so we're recommending that it be reviewed and that it be regulated so that we can maintain the ability for folks to use their properties in different ways while also limiting the negative impacts on a neighborhood. Also, we heard about concern of landlords, not for short-term rentals, but for long-term rentals, that there were some landlords out there that were perhaps not maintaining their properties as they should, perhaps not treating their tenants as well as they should. And so one recommendation to address that is to create a landlord registration program so that the city, at a minimum, knows who's renting units, and so they can better track the maintenance and the treatment of tenants throughout. We'd also like to recommend that there be a clarification of home occupation standards. As I mentioned before, there are some conflicting regulations in the ordinance, and this is proven to be an important program, not only in Asbury Park, but also in other cities, as it gives people the ability to not only live within their home, but perhaps conduct a small business out of it. And we want to make sure the regulations are clear so that folks can continue to do that, while again, not having a negative impact on their neighbors. Additionally, remember talking about the need for additional density in the NC district. Well, one of the regulations in the city's ordinance actually prohibits more than 4 residential units within your existing commercial district. So that B district, that B2 district rather, your NC district. And so let's eliminate this prohibition on more than 4 units as a blanket prohibition, and instead target and regulate density in a way that makes sense for the individual districts and for the individual lots.
And that goes to affordability as well. The more you clamp down on the market, the less affordable homes become.
That's right. And then lastly, for miscellaneous, not related to housing, but is a review for your sign regulations. We'd like to make sure that they're not only creating or permitting signs that are appropriate for the architecture and for the scale of the buildings and for the character of Asbury Park, but also those that are compliant with free speech regulations and case law throughout the state and the country to make sure that the city remains protected. Next, we're going to move into urban design recommendations. Okay. First and foremost, a policy that's really been carried through over the last several decades is to maintain view of the ocean, of the natural features in the city, and of your iconic elements. These are some of the things that make Asbury Park so special, things that draw visitors and residents to the city. And so we want to make sure that you're maintaining views of your historic buildings, of the oceans, of the lakes, and so forth. We'd also like to recommend that there be residential design standards put in place. So within your historic districts, to maintain style of the existing buildings and of additions, so that folks, yes, we want them to be able to improve their homes and to expand their homes as long as it's appropriate for the neighborhood, but it's important that like I said, where located within a historic district, that it be done sensitively to the historic character and the scale in the area. We'd also like to recommend a prohibition of garages between the street and the home. This is something that Asbury Park is largely not had to contend with, but if you drive around a lot of suburban municipalities, it's something that can really erode the character of a neighborhood. And so this is a simple tweak to make sure that new homes, new construction within the city maintains the scale and the character of Asbury Park. For your non-residential buildings, we're also recommending design standards. So again, we want to make sure, as I talked about for your Main Street commercial, your B2 district, we want to make sure that buildings are located close to the street because that promotes the walkability, promotes a comfortability as folks traverse the downtown either on foot or on bicycle. We also want to make sure that there's adequate architectural interest so that you don't have very bland, plain buildings built, that there be windows and doors and architectural features that really make the building distinctive and appealing to visitors and to passersby. We'd also like to address building scale and massing because once again, it's about creating buildings that are appealing to the eye, but also comfortable for folks that may be walking or biking by. And then lastly, for any parking garages constructed within the city, it's important that they be wrapped with uses. And by wrapped, what we mean is that first floor should not simply be a view into the first floor of the parking garage, which is almost like a view into a surface parking lot, but instead to wrap it with perhaps a commercial use so that there's some sort of an interest and an active use along the first floor.
If anyone's familiar with the waterfront redevelopment plan, that contained very detailed urban design standards. It called for, all the things that Beth's talking about, but it also talked about prominent corners and where you could access a parking garage, that you weren't destroying the streetscape to get into your garage or your structure. So we feel like something like that needs to be applied, not necessarily exactly in that form, but a similar approach to your other important non-residential and mixed-use districts.
Okay. Next, let's talk about parking and circulation. And this is a topic that seems to be universally important to just about every stakeholder group. The ability for folks to be safe and to be comfortable biking and walking around the city is just critical. It seems critical to folks' quality of life. And so our first recommendation here is to support expanded transit. Of course, the city, you already have your free ride, you have your NJ Transit Station, and you have a number of bus lines, but quite frankly, there's opportunity for improvement, there's opportunity for expansion. So we recommend that the city work with your existing providers of NJ Transit, work with the free ride folks or perhaps other folks to create intercity transit as well as transit in the city as well as to the region. And to further support that, we'd also like to recommend improvement to your transportation center, and I know that those thoughts and plans are ongoing, but we'd like to recommend that the reexamination report simply support those improvements to expand the transportation center for use and functionality, and also convenience for folks, with things like bicycle parking to again support that the need and desire for bicycling within the city.
Well, as your parking demand, is getting more and more pressure, these alternatives to cars become even more important.
We also heard about the need to enhance public safety because even though walking and biking is near and dear to folks' heart, what we also found is that folks don't always feel safe doing so. Now, they may not feel safe because some of those lighting issues that I talked about, the need for improved lighting and lighting standards, but also, quite frankly, because of speed of vehicles, inadequate crosswalks, and so on. And so we're recommending that a traffic calming study be prepared, and that traffic calming study would look at crash locations, it would look at the condition of your pedestrian and your bicycle facilities to identify places that would benefit from an upgrade to the safety infrastructure, like those crosswalks, for example, but also places to better calm traffic and slow traffic down so that where folks are crossing, whether they're in a crosswalk or not, the vehicles coming down the road are going at a slower speed and perhaps are more likely to see the pedestrian within the crosswalk or perhaps a bicyclist within the bike lane. And so that traffic calming study would be one of an earlier steps to help prioritize locations for traffic safety improvements throughout the city.
And it happens routinely here where, I mean, you have very wide streets in some places, very wide because of some of the angled parking and things like that, and people feel like they can drive very quickly down there. And it's surprising to me how fast people will drive in areas that are very congested with cars and parking, as if nobody could ever step out from between two cars. So that's a top priority, we think.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw, and even just today, when I was driving through the city before this meeting, I was driving down Memorial, and I saw a number of women walking with baby carriages and trying to cross the street in a couple locations. And so it really drives home the need to create safe locations for folks to cross the street and adequate visibility for cars to see those pedestrians. Also in that area of Memorial, we'd also like to better connect the east and west sides of the city. For those of you that have tried to walk to the east and west side, you might notice that there are either inadequate or perhaps no sidewalks crossing the tracks, and this is really a matter of safety, and it's also a matter of, again, making sure that people feel not only safe, but that it's convenient and that it's comfortable to walk, because that's going to help promote walkability. It's going to promote, quite frankly, promote public health. It's also going to be able to help promote people walking or biking to a location rather than driving their car. And so all of this really amounts to enhancing complete streets within the city. And so complete streets are, for those that you may not know, are really providing streets that are accessible to all users. And so by all users, we mean not only cars, but pedestrians, bicyclists, mass transit, but also young, old, and disabled. So virtually anybody that would use the street for just about any reason, making sure that that street is safe and it's comfortable for their use. And so in order to help do that, we'd also like to recommend a pedestrian and bicycle study. And that pedestrian and bicycle study would identify locations that are in need of improved infrastructure, but it would also identify those places, those roads that pedestrians and bicyclists are most likely to traverse to help you prioritize where those improvements should go. And it'll also help identify the destinations most likely for pedestrians and bicyclists to, again, help identify your priorities. As part of your complete streets, there are, we'd like to not only promote pedestrianism, of course we've got sidewalks, but bicycling. And so that is, I would say that's a type of infrastructure that's a bit behind pedestrianism, and that's the case in just about every community. And so when we think about bicycling, we want to think about not only just space on the road, but also bike lanes, but also bike facilities, because of course most people are not out just for a recreational bicycle ride. They want to get on their bike, park their bike, and go do their business. And so we want to make sure that there's safe places and convenient places for folks to do that. We'd also like to recommend that you improve your streetscapes. Streetscapes, this is something that's going to dovetail strongly with your traffic safety study, with your complete streets study, but ultimately the focus of this study to help enhance circulation is going to be about designing these places that are generally between the cartway and the building. And so should the area include a sidewalk? How wide should the sidewalk be? Should the area include street trees? Well, what's the distance between the street trees? Perhaps we should identify the species. This is an opportunity to start thinking about new considerations within the streetscape. And we're thinking specifically about drop-off and pickup locations in designs. And this has to do with something that we all see, the FedEx delivery, the UPS delivery, as cars try to go around and bicyclists try to go around. So trying to create drop-off locations for these trucks to pull in so that we can help to eliminate conflicts between bicyclists and vehicles and the truck, as well as the driver trying to cross the street to get to the businesses. But also, these drop-off and pickup locations are going to start to become more important over the next decade, more so the next several decades, because if you read the news, you can see a lot of talk about autonomous vehicles and also shared service vehicles or shared drivers. And so what we're recommending is that anytime there's a streetscape design, that consideration be given to, well, how will the autonomous or how will the shared service vehicles drop off and pick up their customers? We want to make sure that there's a convenient and a safe location, and one that's outside of the cartway, so again, to eliminate those conflicts with cars trying to drive around and vehicles, or rather pedestrians try to get in or out of the parked or stopped vehicle. And also, Similar to our recommendation to focus on Asbury Avenue for the purpose of arts and culture, we're also recommending a streetscape study specific to this road. Because again, this is an area that could really benefit from some revitalization and from some redevelopment. And one of the ways that we can do is, yes, through zoning, through arts and culture, but we can also do it with the aesthetic improvements and the safety improvements of the streetscape to make Asbury Avenue more appealing to simply walk down, more safe to walk and to bike down. We're also recommending a gateway study. The gateways, and I've highlighted a number of them here, with Main Street, Memorial, Bangs, Springwood, and Asbury Avenues. Gateways are important because this is your first impression of Asbury Park. These streets generally, your first impression of Asbury Park if you're a visitor to the city. And so right now, in some of these locations, you don't quite get the sense of how, quite frankly, fantastic Asbury is and how much it has to offer, about the arts and culture that's prevalent here, about all of the variety of uses, about the nature of the city being on the ocean. There's an opportunity to use these gateways to not only announce that folks are entering Asbury Park, but to start to give folks a sense that this is really a special place. And we can do that through a variety of means that the gateway study would identify, but in part we're thinking about streetscape improvements, signage, announcing Asbury Park, particular architectural features on these buildings, and perhaps other items as well that would announce your entry to this very special city in Jersey. And then also, somewhat related is improving wayfinding signs. There are a number of wayfinding signs in the city to help direct folks from, say, the transportation center to the downtown near or along Cookman Avenue, but we actually heard from a number of people that the wayfinding signs were perhaps too small or inadequate. And so this re-examination report is an opportunity to take another look at these signs and find out if it's a matter of adding more or adding different ones, perhaps larger or with different information. And so we're recommending that this study be undertaken to help better direct visitors throughout the city to common destinations. And of course, we wouldn't be complete if we didn't talk specifically about parking. So the city has a 2015 comprehensive parking management plan, and this is a very good document. However, even in just 2 years, things have changed, and so we're recommending that that be updated. We heard from a lot of folks that parking was in need of better management. It was perhaps inadequate in some places, or perhaps there was parking available, but people didn't feel comfortable walking from the parking lot or the parking garage to their destination. And so this comprehensive parking management plan is this update to it is an opportunity to not only identify whether or not parking in number is adequate, but also whether or not its accessibility to the common destinations is adequate. We're also recommending an elimination of duplicative parking standards. There are parking standards located throughout your ordinance, and so it ultimately creates a conflict, and we're left with a question, well, does this use require 5 parking spaces or 7 parking spaces, because the ordinance is unclear. And so this is an opportunity to eliminate those duplicative standards and to, again, sort of streamline your ordinance. And of course, consistent with Complete Streets, we're also recommending that bicycle parking be required for non-residential and for multifamily buildings. Next, let's talk about housing. Okay. So first and foremost, we want to encourage housing for all incomes in Asbury Park. Asbury Park has been successful lately in that you've gotten a lot of new housing. A lot of this is available for upper income households. And so the concern that we heard from some of your stakeholders, some of your community leaders, is that existing housing is becoming unaffordable, and there's a concern that the future housing will not be affordable to folks that currently live in Asbury Park, or the variety of folks that they want to feel comfortable living in Asbury Park and have the ability to do so. And so we're recommending that mixed income housing be included within multifamily projects. And by mixed income, we mean not only your market rate housing that's priced at whatever the market can withstand, but also low income housing, moderate income housing, and also, as I'm going to highlight down here, middle income housing. And so that range is between that ranges up to, 120% of median income. So when we talk about affordable housing in New Jersey, that generally means up to 80% of the area's median income. And that's certainly a very important subset of housing, but what can result in communities is ultimately only two segments of the population: the wealthy that can afford the luxury housing that's currently being built, and those that qualify for affordable housing that have a maximum income of up to 80%. And so we're recommending that the city consider not only your market rate housing, not only your low and your moderate, but this middle income housing to help bridge the gap so that you truly have housing available for people of all incomes within the city. And so we want to encourage affordable housing developers to continue providing affordable housing. They're playing an important role of providing that low and moderate income housing, but again, we want to continue to work with your multifamily projects, your multifamily developers to make sure that they're providing housing for a variety of incomes. And also for housing, again, for arts and culture, we want to encourage the development of artist live work housing in a number of locations throughout the city. Okay, economic development. So the first recommendation is to quite simply support growing industries with permitted uses. One of the things that we heard from your labor and demographic analysis that was completed by Forward Planning is that there's room to grow in healthcare and technical services within the city. Healthcare is all the things that I think we think of, doctor's offices, urgent care, a variety of health-related uses. Technical services, however, are more related to professional services, thinking about, for example, planners, but also lawyers, accountants, and so on. Again, to help promote economic development in the city, but also to help promote job creation, creating an arts district. Again, we talked about Asbury Avenue as one location. We also want to continue to promote the revitalization of the waterfront and the central business district. This has been something that's been ongoing in the city for quite some time, and it's important that those efforts remain steady because while the city's enjoyed enormous success recently, we want to make sure that that success continues. Right now, there's a workforce development plan that's being prepared. And so rather than using this re-examination report as an opportunity to try to craft workforce development recommendations, we frankly want to defer to the experts on the topic. This is a plan that's going to be completed this year, and we're going to recommend the planning board review that plan and take out of it those recommendations that are within their jurisdiction. And then, as I talked about before, recommending increased density in the B2, your Main Street commercial, and your NC neighborhood commercial districts. And that refers to that limitation that we recommend elimination of that prohibits more than 4 residential units within a building there. And then lastly, for economic development, we're recommending that the city develop a process and criteria for offering incentives. Incentives in the form, most commonly in the form of tax abatements or incentives in your redevelopment areas. But there are also other forms of incentives that might be offered in the form of, say, building height and building density. And so while incentives can form a really important component to being able to advance a project that has community benefits, it's important that the incentives be offered in a way that's objective, in a way that's transparent, and that they be properly calibrated to the project, so properly calibrated to the benefits that the community is going to receive. So for example, is the existing condition one that folks desire to be eliminated? Is the proposal to develop a use that's really important and worthwhile in the community? And also calibrating it to the need, making sure that those developers that are going to receive the incentive truly need that additional density or truly need that tax abatement in order to advance the project.
Yeah, so it's sort of a complex thing that happens. Maybe some of you understand it a little bit more, but the generality is you really need to, if a developer comes up and says, here's my pro forma, I need X to subsidize my project, and it's a really good project, the city, on the other hand, needs their own expert to validate that pro forma. And then there's the qualitative criteria that we would look at, or the city would look at, and the benefits.
Okay, let's talk about historic preservation. Okay, we're recommending that the city prepare a historic preservation study, and as part of that, you consider a number of things, including creation of a historic preservation commission, Also improving historic district standards. Right now, as I mentioned, and actually as shown on the map here, the city has some existing historic districts as well as a number of historic buildings. And so we're recommending that standards be put in place to preserve those existing portions of the buildings that are have historic significance. We're also recommending requiring preservation and adaptive reuse of important historic buildings. And so essentially strengthening the ordinance to better protect your historic resources within the city. Let's talk about sustainability next. And so the sustainability element is going to address a number of topics, but quite frankly, the topic that we heard most from was really about the lakes within Asbury Park. It's one of the things that really make the city special, but also one of those topics that give people some concern. And so there was a concern that this re-examination report should be used to help improve the lake water quality. So looking at things like stormwater management, restoring the lake banks, and also removing debris within and around the lake. So making sure that they are not only improve water quality, but also serve as an improved asset to the community and an improved asset to the neighborhoods that surround them.
And the idea would really be to have a unified, there's 3 different organizations that oversee the lakes, and to have a sort of a unified plan that encompasses all 3 of those, such that they're managed in a way and they're treated in a way that reflects their needs from an environmental standpoint, from a functional standpoint, and also from a recreational standpoint. They each have a different character in terms of where they are relative to different land use districts, and we think that could come under an umbrella and it would be a better way to move forward, and also to set the stage for funding opportunities through the Environmental Infrastructure Trust or other ways to get funding.
We're also recommending that the city identify locations and prioritize use of green infrastructure over gray infrastructure. And green infrastructure is really an approach to water management that protects, that restores, that mimics the natural water cycle. And so when we think about green infrastructure, some of the common examples that people I think are familiar with are things like rain gardens, bioinfiltration basins, and so on. And so we're recommending that while this is an important component of stormwater management, quite frankly, all green infrastructure techniques are not appropriate in all locations. You've got to make sure that you match the technique to the appropriate soils and to the appropriate vegetation and the function of the need for the green infrastructure. So we're going to recommend that the city conduct a study to identify those places within the city, whether it's parks, streetscapes, and so forth, development lots where particular methods of green infrastructure are most appropriate. Once that's been done, the city can use that information to help prioritize. So if there's a stormwater management issue that needs to be addressed in a certain area of the city, the first step is to say, let's prioritize green infrastructure over gray infrastructure. Gray infrastructure is essentially water in pipes. And then once it's made that decision, to identify what the appropriate green infrastructure methods are. And so by going forward with the study first, it'll help streamline that process.
Yeah, and one of the things that we did a plan in Hoboken, which was a green infrastructure plan, and what we did was Hoboken didn't want to sacrifice its streets and the function of its streets to put in basins or any of these other swales and things like that. So we looked at alternatives that might be hidden, but would also allow the streets to function the way streets are supposed to function. We also looked at incentives. There may be incentives that you can offer a developer to add these things, whereby if they can recharge X amount of stormwater coming off their site, well, maybe they get a little more density or something like that. So there's ways to do this, and it really takes a more detailed look than there is in a re-examination report, but we think we have a good way to articulate this recommendation so that it could be carried forth in a real plan.
Okay, of course we want to promote the cleanup of contaminated sites. There are a number of places that need cleanup, and so we're recommending that the city continue to promote their cleanup and work with the developers as necessary to help them accomplish that. We also want to promote adaptive reuse of buildings, and this really dovetails with the historic preservation recommendations. You guys have a lot of great buildings in the city that perhaps are not being fully used, or perhaps there's a change of use and they're desired by a developer or by a property owner. And there are a number of opportunities either now or that will come forward in the future that we recommend the city take to retain that existing building, to keep that historic character, but instead modernize it on the interior, perhaps the exterior to some extent, to make it more inviting to new uses. We also want to recommend that the city improve its recycling. I know that you guys already have a recycling program, of course, and it's going well, but there's always room for improvement. And this is important because not only it's an environmental issue, being able to reduce waste that goes into landfills or other means of trash reduction or trash disposal, but also increasing recycling can have positive fiscal consequences for the municipality, as you're no longer paying to haul away that what otherwise would have been trash. And then lastly for this slide is to create an tree inventory and maintenance plan. The city has an urban tree canopy plan, but we're recommending that it go a step farther to actually inventory your existing trees. And this will be helpful because not only will it help the city better understand this asset that it has, but it'll also help with maintenance obligations so that you can identify when trees were last maintained, what the species are, help you track ongoing issues that may be within the city. We also want to encourage green building and green certification. So by green certification, I'm thinking the most common is LEED certified buildings, but there are also Energy Star buildings, Green Globes, and a couple other options. And so this is a great tool that developers have in order to reduce the environmental footprint of the building, whether that's through providing green roofs or reduce energy use, renewable energy, improved water conservation techniques, and so on. And so we recommend the city encourage that, and that can be done through just frankly stating it in the master plan, providing some policy guidance as to why it's important, but it can also be encouraged in a number of other ways. If you think about some of those incentives that we talked about a minute, maybe this is a community benefit that the city wants to promote. And so we're going to, in this re-examination report, we'll identify a couple ways that the city can do this. We also want to promote climate change, resiliency, and adaptation. As a waterfront community, this could not be more important for Asbury Park. And so first, we'd recommend that the city monitor climate change projections. For those that follow this information in the news, it seems they're frequently being changed as new and updated science becomes available, and so it's important that waterfront communities continue to check in on the most recent projections so that you understand how this is going to affect you in the future. As part of the resiliency adaptation, climate change adaptation and resiliency, we're also going to recommend that you maintain your coastal edges. So of course I'm thinking predominantly about the beaches to make sure that you can fight against erosion and also fight against sea level rise. We also want to recommend that you review and update flood hazard area construction standards to the extent necessary. There are some places in the city, of course, that are within the special flood hazard area, and to the extent that those buildings may need to rise either at reconstruction or in the future, we want to make sure that the increased elevation is done in a way that's sensitive to the neighborhood. For those of you that may have walked around some other Jersey Shore communities where there are homes at the street level and then perhaps 10 feet above, that's the type of situation that we'd like to avoid. Of course, folks may need to raise their homes, but there's a way to do it to treat what would have been that first floor, that edge of the building, in a way that's sensitive and compatible with the neighborhood. And then lastly, using green infrastructure to help address climate change. So we're thinking about ways that stormwater management can be better addressed in the coming years. Okay, open space, parks, lakes, recreation recommendations. So we'd like to recommend that the city coordinate its recreation programs with the community partners. Now, this is frankly something that's ongoing, something that's working well, but there's opportunity for improvement. The schools are part of this, and your other community organizations help promote recreation for youth as well as adults in the city, and this is something that can be further built upon. We also want to, of course, recommend that the city maintain and enhance its existing recreational areas. The city has some fantastic parks, and we want to make sure that they stay fantastic through proper maintenance and also upgrades as necessary in the future. We're also recommending that the city explore new ways to create parks and playgrounds in underserved neighborhoods. And so we've started this process by taking a look at your existing parks within the city, and you can see a map of this over on the right on the screen. And so when we look at this, while there are parks located and recreation areas located in every area of the city, there are certainly parts that are a bit underserved. And so when we look at this map, we consider neighborhoods on the west side, for example, that are not well served by parks. Yes, there are schools, but those schools can have restrictions on their available hours and uses. And so as opportunities come up through development or perhaps through acquisition of vacant lots, there may be opportunities for enhancement of recreation areas, not only on the west side, but also on the east side as well. And so last for our open space, parks, lakes and recreation topic is to develop what was referenced before, this unified strategic plan for the lakes. Like I said, and then we've both said, your lakes are one of the organizing principles. They're a huge asset for Asbury Park, and they've been getting more attention over time. I know you have 3 lake commissions, and we're going to recommend that a unified strategic plan be developed that would address all 3 lakes. And then within this unified plan, there would be a chapter or an element addressing the specific needs for each lake. And this is, the idea is that it would address beautification, so how the lakes look, how the edges feel to visitors, but also the amenities available, whether that's just seating or perhaps other recreation amenities, the environment, so that's the water quality, and then lastly, connections to and from the lake areas to make sure that they're easily accessed by pedestrians, but also bicyclists, and again, making sure that there are bicycle facilities so that folks are comfortable parking their bike and taking a walk or doing as they please in these areas. Our last topic is community facilities. And so the first recommendation in this element is to very simply reassess the needs of city departments. And this is a recommendation that was actually included in your 2006 master plan. It's not been fully complete 10 years later. And so this is an opportunity to take a look at exactly what space needs are necessary for each city department, and make sure that you have a building now or make plans in the future to make sure that those needs are satisfied. The existing firehouse in the city on Main Street in Asbury is in need of relocation, so we're going to recommend that space for that very important community facility be found, so that not only is there improved space for your firefighters, but also space to accommodate the growing needs of the city. And then lastly, for community facilities, we're going to recommend improvement to public safety. And I talked about this in a number of the topics already, in terms of the need for improved street lighting so that folks feel comfortable walking on the street, not only to get from their destination to the parking lot, but also, just quite frankly, throughout the commercial districts and throughout their neighborhoods. And then we also want to recommend improvement of sidewalks and crosswalks, so again, folks feel safe walking throughout the city and can do so without potential vehicles getting in their way. And so with that, that's a summary of the big ideas that we have for our recommendations. And as Michael said, this evening, while we wanted to come here tonight and present to you the recommendations, or preliminary draft recommendations, it's also really important that we hear from you about what your questions you may have, what comments you may have on what you heard this evening, and also comments that you may have on what you didn't hear this evening.
So that was a lot to get through. We tried to do it as quickly as we could and as clearly as we could, but we wanted to save as much time as possible for you folks to have an opportunity to respond and reflect on what you heard tonight. If you have new issues that you'd like to bring to the table, you can bring those as well. We're here to listen from this point forward for the rest of the meeting. I know that we've got at least another hour, at least. You know, do you want to say anything, Barbara?
Just have anybody who would like to speak?
Yes, anybody who would like to speak, line up. Is the microphone's there?
And I'm going to put their, you want to announce I'm going to put their comments up?
Yeah, the way this is going to work, folks, is there's going to be this orderly process that forms in the back where people, orderly process, line up in the back. Beth is going to switch from the screen that was showing the presentation to actually, she's going to be typing down what we hear tonight, try to summarize it. If you feel like you need to add more to it, you can use a card. But we're going to try to limit the initial comments to 5 minutes so that we give everybody a chance. And if we end up with a little bit more time at the end, you may be able to come back.
Will those notes be placed somewhere?
These will be part of our files. So this is going to be shared with the planning board subcommittee. It's going to be up here. It'll be
Shared with the community also?
Of course. No, there's no reason it won't be. This is a public meeting, so no reason. So who's first?
Good evening. My name is Taretha Jones, former business owner, property income owner, former employee of the City of Asbury Park, the public health nurse, and the Bureau of Special Services. I've been here since I was a little baby from 1960. A family had business here in 1960s up through the early 2000s. So I just want to make some bullets here. Asbury Park Avenue, if you do that as an arts place in some of the plans, there's no other alternative from the residential areas for parking. That's bullet number 1. As far as parking, there never was parking in Asbury Park. In its heyday, it was no parking. People walked, including me and the rest of us, from the very far west side. Memorial Drive was called Railroad Avenue. It was just a 2-little roadway, and you parked and walked wherever you could, however you could, toward the beachfront. That was it, and there were, density was much more increased than what it is now in some areas. The short-sightedness in the plans that begin in the early 1990s was just that. Density was decreased by eminent domain. Those empty spaces over there on the east side, that was all affordable housing that was viable. Those folks were literally kicked out of Asbury Park, and it all went down tubes from there. Zoning changes were done during the 1990s without consideration of what existing change. So that confusion you have was a muck of confusion from a couple decades before, and code and zoning and other folks were trying to pull that into place, but it didn't happen because you had staff changes and disruptions and elected governments and all that other madness. Your historic arts and cultural district is Asbury Park, Madison, and Bangs Avenue. It's not looking like that now because during that 1990s time, people were making changes with no consideration of an urban plan. And we were here pushing and fighting and kicking and screaming for them to do that. It was ignored, and hence you have what you have. You cannot have a viable urban area with nothing but restaurants. And restaurants are your most noted to be here today, gone tomorrow. The turnover has been more than we have all changed our underwear this past week. Modernization of zoning and code enforcement was going on even when I was an employee here during the 1990s. They were going from hard copy papers to bringing things up to code to link them together, and then that again was disrupted by staff changes and governmental changes and people that had their own little narrow tunnel vision views and had no understanding or regard for common sense and civility and what applicable laws were. Landlord registrations had been here. I'm a former landlord.
2 minutes left.
I'm getting there, I'm getting there. I also, being the public works, being the public health nurse, rode most of the time with code enforcement and police as part of my job. And from what I can see, I think that department is underutilized. Needs to be more proactive, doing more of what I was doing, because people don't even know that it's there now. But
I'm sorry, was that the health?
Public Health, Bureau of Special Services. Code enforcement was doing exactly what you slated, along with the zoning officers. One zoning officer retired and resigned because he was so sick of aggravation and being pushed to violate issues because people coming in didn't want to do the things they needed to do. Your sign regulations, that was adopted against the will of those with common sense and business things. As a matter of fact, I threatened them if they came to my business and threatening that we're not in compliance, I was going to bust somebody in the face. I said it right here, standing at the mic in this chamber.
1 minute.
So, That is the bullets. I'm sure everybody here is probably going to piggyback, but I just want to put that in there because what you're saying, you're talking about going back to what the regulations were in 1995, where they could have been just grandfathered and worked in. That 4-unit limit was a mad thing. People protested against that, and that was pushed anyway.
Good evening. I'm Dan Harris, lifelong resident of Asbury Park, and I just want to address a few things. Can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay, that's cool. And I'm apologizing because as soon as I'm done, I'm going to leave because I'm late for choir rehearsal. Okay, so it's not out of disrespect, but it's out of respect for higher order than you guys. Okay? Yeah, you're kind of down on the scale. Okay, first off, when you discuss transportation, there was no realization that there's a need for bus stops on the west side, especially in the southwest quadrant. When you go down Springwood Avenue, on the side of town where I live, there's not one bus stop, but there are people. So, you need to understand that. You need to understand that when you.
NJ Transit bus stop?
Yeah, NJ Transit bus stop. There are no bus stops. Okay, people have to walk from one end of Asbury across the tracks most of the time to catch a bus. So if there's any type of concern for the people on that side of town, maybe put some bus stops there on the development of Springwood Avenue. Another thing is that I keep hearing about arts and culture, arts and culture, arts and culture. The only thing about arts and culture does not create jobs for the rest of the population. I heard nothing about retail that mixes into the neighborhoods where, one, people in the neighborhood do not have to drive to the mall or go to Neptune or go all the way out on Route 66 to buy groceries, where they could buy groceries in town. The second thing that does, that creates jobs for the people on that side of town, okay? And the cool thing about that is people do not have to drive, they can usually walk to work, okay? So when you start neighborhood commercial, neighborhood retail, that not only supports the retail, but it supports the population by the way of jobs for the population. It doesn't have to be a career job, but some way for people in households to supplement their income. So when you start talking about building these places, you have to talk about mixed usage, okay? Where there may be not just a clothing store or a food store. We got enough restaurants in Asbury Park, but we don't have meat markets, we don't have shoe stores, we don't have grocery stores other than right here on Memorial Drive. Those things don't exist. So I don't know how you can do a master plan and look at the fact that there's no retail, very little retail, and retail creates jobs, and it's what I always call, because I have my MBA from 50 years ago, what we used to call the multiplier effect by keeping that money in the neighborhood, hiring in the neighborhood, spending in the neighborhood, and not letting the money go outside the neighborhood. I was writing notes. Okay, retail, bus stops. Oh, health concerns. You talked about the population being 55 and over. Okay, the one thing that tells me is that people are getting older. I get my Social Security, and I'm 60. Hey, look, I can tell what time it is. Don't mess with me, okay? You go wait for the next one. No, I know how to tell time. Okay. What we're saying is, if we're talking about an older population, then there should be a particular attention to that industry, okay? I find nursing homes, healthcare facilities, rehabilitation facilities in Neptune, in Ocean Township, but how many of them do we have in Asbury Park? But you're saying the population is getting older, so you need to address that industry when you're talking about a master plan and you're talking about growth in that industry. So I mean, it's a little more than arts and culture. It's a little more than what the millennials are doing. And if you're going to pay attention to the baby boomers who now are going to live to be 80 and 90 years old, you have to address them through industry, okay? Now I got a minute left, but I got to go. So I tell you what, Ben, you can tell that. You can come up here and have my last minute, okay?
Hello, my name is Derek Minot Bloom. the Social and Food Justice Director of Trinity Church, also part of the Asbury Park Education Justice Collective and the Asbury Park Anti-Hunger and Homeless Coalition. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you all to all the work you did, and to the City Council, and then to all my community members here. And I might say things we all disagree about, but I'm excited to build with you all and figure out how we disagree and kind of work together so that we all get what we want in some ways. So just to kind of put that out there, and apologizing for not being able to make the first 2 meetings. I'm not going to tell you why. And one of the visions I have, and a lot of people have, is for Asbury Park to be a very inclusive city. So that's based off of ethnicity, LGBTQ community, people of different classes, and also our undocumented and migrant communities that are part of our community. And so with the things I'm going to say, I'm not necessarily critiquing the plan or city council or the history of Asbury Park, but just the recognition that the United States, we have to deal with racial injustice towards indigenous folks and also African folks, and that it's not just an issue here. There's at least 400 years or 500 years of racism we have to deal with, and I'm really excited to kind of figure that out together here. But anyway, so not blaming anyone, but just seeing that Asbury Park is, I think, like 57 or 60% black. As a city and as a planning board, we really have to figure out how to get more folks to these meetings, and especially, not to judge folks, but how do we also get low-income folks to these meetings so that to have a diverse city, we have to get opinions from everybody. Again, not blaming you, but I think whether coalitions can be formed to really get people out, or incentives to get people, that's just one thing. And then just hearing about art spaces and things like that, I'm just curious of people of color spaces and art spaces in the Southwest Quadrant, and really respecting the her story or history of that area with jazz and things like that. And I'm wondering about economic development that we could have for more black businesses to restart there. And then also just recognizing you all have this huge plan, and I don't know it all, but just affordable housing in all sectors of the city, sort of similar to Yonkers or something like that. I was going to blurb the HBO show, but well, I just did. I didn't tell you the name of it. But just that it be in all sectors of the city, and what does that really look like? How do we become not like Seattle or New York, but really be a city that's invested to be inclusive of all people? And that's hard work, and there's not a lot of cities doing that because money speaks, but how do we support high-income or wealthy folks, but also low-income folks? How do we create a city where everyone can be honored? The private sector controls a lot, but how can we also find private sectors that are interested in social justice and mixed-income housing? 2 minutes. Thank you. I actually had my clock set, and then I didn't set it though. I was too nervous. So that's like 10 seconds extra. No, but also just historic preservation on the southwest side. Thinking about what used to be there, the different jazz clubs and things like that. It might not be there. It might be dilapidated, but just also to remember that within that quadrant. Can't read my writing. Oh, and then also just with affordable housing, I'm just wondering, kind of similar, what does it look like? I mean, this is kind of more to us as a community and city council, but how do we actually enforce companies to create more affordable housing? So have policies in order so that they're required to, rather than just encourage. Exactly. So encouraging zoning to actually have stipulations for how much mixed housing goes. And even maybe we can get some low-income housing, because a lot of affordable housing isn't really affordable to low-income folks. And then also just kind of similar to zoning, promoting climate resiliency and encouraging green buildings. I'm just thinking of Berlin. I mean, you have to, if you build something, you have to replace it on top of the roof as far as the greenery and things like that. So what does it look like to us to not just initially promote for developers, but to enforce developers to care about environmental justice? Anyway, thank you for your time, and look forward to getting to know the faces I don't know here. Thank you.
Hi,
Two things real quick. My name is Gail Rosewater. The first one I sit on the Wesley Lake Commission, and I'd like to thank you for, and the whole team, for the strength of the recommendation for the lakes. As everybody knows, as so much of Asbury Park has just been neglected for so long, those lakes have been neglected. So thank you for the part in the recommendations for the lakes. That's great. The second thing I'm going to talk about as a resident, I'm not sure if I missed it maybe, but we really need to address public restrooms. I live on Lake Ave, and we need to either require businesses that they have to put them in, a percentage of them or something. I've had people using the pedal boats come to my home, knock on my door, ask to use my bathroom. I'd like to see a restroom at the pedal boats that looks like the pedal boat building, maybe on the back of it. I think it could be hidden very well. A restroom maybe that the city puts in. I also would like to see one perhaps at the parking lot that's connected to the casino. I live on Lake Avenue, and the rose bushes along the lake are a revolving door for public urination. People urinate against all the cars parked on Lake Ave. I can look out my living room window and see this on a Friday or Saturday night, and it is not an exaggeration to say it is a revolving door. We need public restrooms all over the city. I'm sure people in the Central Business District agree with that. Once people leave the venue that they're at, I don't know what they're thinking or what they're doing, but please, a strong statement in there with some kind of ordinance or regulation that requires a certain number of public restrooms per business or something.
That comes under, public restrooms would be in the community facilities recommendations, and then would be translated, if it was the city side, into a capital improvement.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Pat Lisinski. They call me T. I'm a resident for 32 years. I'm on the Wesley Lake Commission with Gail, and I've been a Friends of Wesley Lake, Citizens of Wesley Lake for about 20 some odd years. I have a few issues and concerns. It goes up and down between resident and environment. I agree with Gail because they do it on Main Street, all up and down Main Street. You can sit in a dark city over here and see somebody pee right across the street. In broad daylight, they do it all the time. Let's see. In regard to light industrial, I just want to make sure that they do the correct road classification around that, because we have very heavy trucks and horrible traffic on the west side. I mean, the west side all over town, with them going up and speeding on wherever they feel like it. And the access to Asbury Avenue, they cut off. So I just want to make sure, and parking, because that's an issue. There's no parking for big trucks and large trucks in that area. Parking lot, along with you have proven and planting and buffers on the land use traffic regulations, maybe parking lot standards. I know you mentioned something like that, but include also for plantings, but drainage and filtering, just to prevent the non-point source pollution, because that's not done right now. Like, it's hard to enforce or to encourage developers or new people to do that.
Well, yeah, because a lot of it's redevelopment, the staff,
Yeah,
the state,
I know,
digital
believe me,
property,
yep.
We can have local regulations that go beyond the state.
And that's weird because it does violate the CAFRA rules, and they just let it happen too. But that's beside. Then I agree with Mr. Harris about the 55 and older. I don't want people to start moving out, because we're all getting way past the 55 and older. Most of us have been here for a long time, and we just want to make sure we can stay, because it gets expensive. Then also about the parking and circulation, the footbridges on Wesley Lake, they're gateways also. You don't have them listed as a gateway. They connect Ocean Grove and Asbury Park and places south, and the better it'd be better connection to the transportation center and the transit village if we get the designation, and also to improve the circulation, as someone said, Mr. Harris, about that between Main Street and those areas, so that there's more employment opportunities, so that it's easier to get to work, no matter what town you want to work in. Road improvements. Also, when you mentioned about brownfields, and we have a lot of brownfields in the roads also. There's brownfields all over town. We have a really big issue because we're industrialized early on in the years. So even with the roads, with the railroad tracks, they are petroleum based. So once you start digging up the roads, you're going to have a problem, and that has been an issue before with the Route 33 over here and Ocean Grove entrance. Oh, shush! Don't interrupt me. I'm on a flow. I'll make it if you don't interrupt me. Let's see. Also on sustainability, I also want to implore that people make sure, or government or your planning, make sure that there are code enforcement regarding restaurant washing of their kitchens in the street, and also the vehicle washing of tractor trailers in the street, because they do it all the time, and it's very hard. I don't know why it's not prevented, because they do it all the time, all over.
So you say that the restaurants here, more here, and the trucks over on Memorial Drive?
Yeah, I've seen them many times, and you can catch them early in the morning, but sometimes you can't catch the trucks, but they do wash them. That means like car carriers and all that kind of stuff. Promote the brownfields I mentioned, improve recycling, but also improve the waste management, trash receptacles, because a lot of them are open and they're not, it's hard to find one that's actually adequate, and they need to be placed over in proper areas, or like not overabundance of trash, but some places where you make sure that people just don't throw their house garbage or their business garbage in it. I don't know how you're going to figure that one out. Then also the flood hazard, to also try and see if you can reverse or plan to reverse some of the improvements that were done that actually are not improvements, but they make the flooding issues worse. Like I don't know if there's any kind of plan in your plan to help address like a cause and effect of what has been done and how you may be able to reverse or have it improved and fixed, because that's not, Wesley Lake is a example, because they catch the box culvert was taken out and all the stormwater was reverted into the lake, not passed by and right into the ocean. So we have a lot of issue with flooding and damages to cars and property. Also in open parks and lakes, reevaluate, that's why I said reevaluate the projects so you could fix them, because that's part of the lake improvement, beautification, and use. Also, educational opportunities. I don't see anything mentioned about providing that to the school system, and so they promote stewardship and do like projects, science projects in the lake, and maybe have future scientists and biology people come out.
Part of the unified plan.
Okay. Then traffic control you mentioned, and more collaboration between boards and committees within the city, because people don't communicate, and one board does one thing which really shouldn't have been done because it violates what the other board is trying to enforce. So there's not communication there at all. And also share strategies. And then one more thing, also emergencies. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world. I don't see any mention of plans to prevent a tragedy to happen here. And this place is perfect with the crowds and all, everybody that comes. So that's one thing I want to make sure that's in the plan, that they can address that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Jerry Scanlon. Thank you for your presentation. It was very informative. I've been an investor in Asbury since 2000. I bought and sold many properties, and I'm from New York City, but I live in Long Branch now by accident. Okay, I always thought Asbury Park was an economic engine for the region, rivaled Red Bank and a few other big places. And my vision was Memorial Drive should be turned into corporate headquarters and give them tax abatements to build, as long as 25% of their workforce lives in town. That will create affordable housing, because the people have to live in town, and there'll be pressure on the city to create affordable housing for middle income people. But also, by having corporations set up headquarters along Memorial Drive, it creates a nice view when the train rides through town instead of seeing slums. The other thing I want to say, Asbury Avenue and maybe First Avenue should become one-way street, and Asbury Avenue should look like a boulevard with new apartment buildings with parking garages underneath them. And the new parking garages should be out there where the land's cheap, so when people come down off the parkway, they have a place to park before they get into the city, and maybe a trolley system to ferry people around. And Asbury Avenue should become a new commercial zone onto itself, like Main Street. Now Main Street and the train station, we always talk about Transit Village, but there's no reason why we can't copy or duplicate Red Bank with the Galleria, put up buildings that look like some of those old buildings. Then the other thing, Memorial Drive needs to be redone. You could be driving down Memorial Drive, and if you're talking, you may go for a stop sign, you don't know when to stop, there's lights. There's 3 different ways to go through Memorial Drive. It needs to be one consistent way, lights along the whole strip. The other thing is, when you say higher density, to me that means urban renewal, means loss of original streetscape and lots of buildings. The old council from 2000 to 2010 did a great job of erasing a lot of Asbury Park historical landmarks. So I think we got to be careful when you say high density, maybe on vacant land, but not taking old buildings down. Then the problem with the lakes that we have here, they also border other towns. So everything we do with the lakes needs semi-approval from the other towns of cooperation. And then the other thing is I wanted to say, Main Street, they're going to do a bike lane and stuff, which I really didn't think was a good idea. Grand Avenue should be the bike lane, but they should do something better with Main Street, making the buildings look like Red Bank, you know, cement facades that look like an old city, because Asbury Park was famous on Main Street for car dealership, and they're gone. So you have those buildings there that are 1 or 2 stories. But if you had 4-story buildings like Cookman Avenue, it could be another city again. And thank you very much for your help.
Thanks for your comments.
Hello, my name is Conrad Nebled. I live at 1218 Sunset Avenue. And of the 10 topics that you guys spoke about, I wasn't sure where tourism fit in.
Economic development.
Huh?
Economic development.
Okay, because it wasn't mentioned under economic development.
And it actually could fit under economic development.
A lot of areas.
And also some of the infrastructure, if we're talking about circulation, or we're talking about parking, and all, it could blend into.
But I think it's important, thank you. I think it's important to highlight tourism because we're a very unique town. It's, 1.4 square miles, beach, there's more ocean than city, but that's what people come here for. So I just really would recommend that in the plan that tourism gets punched out. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
How you doing? Charles Trott. Okay, everyone can hear me, right? Thank you. All right. I want to know about this art and culture plan. Tell me a little bit about it.
The arts and culture plan is not anything that's been built yet, but it would be a more detailed look at what the potential is for the development of the arts and culture within the city, and the elements of land use zoning and physical infrastructure that would facilitate it, such as how much area you might need, what types of buildings would be appropriate. We talked about studios and the ability to live and work in the same building, things like that. It would also talk about how it saw that being subsidized, because one of the issues with arts and culture is that generally it's, not everybody's, a gazillionaire when they're welding, sculptures and painting, things like that. So there's a subsidy part to that too. So you try to create incentives for developers to subsidize those.
Understood. Understood. There's a arts district already in Asbury. There's some type of arts commission with regards to public art in Asbury. So I want to know how you're going to work with that.
That could be.
Let me just add. The other thing sounds interesting. Create an arts district on Asbury Avenue. Asbury, as you might know, from the westernmost part of Ridge Avenue down and all this water, Are you going to move out stores and houses that exist now? There are a few that are seemingly abandoned, but you know, there's a big factory building that I think, unless he wants to sell out, that'd be great. On 93rd and Asbury. Okay. But there's an arts district. I mean, most people who, you know something about the arts. I mean, it's not New York, it's not Newark, it's not Philadelphia Bureau of Arts Program, but it exists, and on the boardwalk. But I really have been into what's going on about the West Side. I don't remember very much about that. With regards to mixed use, with regards to we talk about middle income, what about low income? According to government standards, I'm just a scooch above low income. So let's talk about that.
Well, I think it was a theme throughout the presentation and throughout the recommendations that what we're trying to do is create the framework for addressing very low, moderate, and then middle. So a stratified area or a stratified series of income levels that would be facilitated through deed restrictions within new projects that would be presumably there'd be incentives for developers to include those for requirements.
When we talk about low income and even middle income, would that pertain to the West Side, specifically the Springwood Avenue corridor? What are we going to do? I've heard many plans, seen the drawings, beautiful drawings, but when they come, when? And who's really talking about it? They say, oh, it's gonna be here in 2020. Yes. So I just want you to think about it and understand that there are some people, I'm not trying to represent them, but I probably am if they think like me. When I'm gonna see something on Springwood with regards to some of these lovely plans, I like some, but I need to see it implemented or hear more about it as it pertains to Springwood Avenue and the Southwest corridor. Now, is my time up or what?
I still have another minute.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. So go ahead. Address that if you would, just a little bit more.
Well, we've talked about, particularly the Springwood Avenue corridor, and one of the things that we're really trying to, through all of the land use categories and all the districts, is to make sure that we find those places that we can change without destroying what's there now. So the idea is that we don't want to go and say, okay, we're going to create low and moderate income housing, and it's a 4-story mid-rise in the middle of a single-family block. We have to pick and choose those specific. It could be a specific site or a block where we can have that change. The change has to be moderated so that it's not disruptive to the things that are going to remain.
But as you know, it's a big blank expanse, mostly on, guess where? Springwood Avenue. Easy to see.
Right.
So that's the place I'm really talking about. Thank you.
Tracy Rogers, Springwood Avenue. The landlord registry, that's a state mandated ordinance that the city should be following.
Yeah, I think there's some issues with the entities and trying to make sure that they know who the contact. That's more of it.
Yeah, that sheet should be made up, and
right.
It's actually mandated. Before we talk about affordable housing, we're at 2015, and there's no 2015 affordable round plan, as I understand it. The city doesn't have one. Right now, when we take all these elements and talk about it, one, we should look at quite a few different elements. One, I would like to see it across the whole city, not looking at just projects or developments. If we could do mixed use in some of these projects, let's look to do them. We have other elements. A lot of homes in Asbury have back homes in the back which we could use as accessories. Mm-hmm. You haven't talked about those. Those can be put down, and people given tax breaks, which would also help with their property tax by renovating those and creating affordable housing. We can use that as an element. Right now, Hoboken has a straightforward 10% affordable housing in Hoboken, which is the same size basically as us, but they put it out there and they did it. Basically, you don't have to look at incentives. People want to come and move here. So a lot of these developments can add this. How much of affordable housing do we have on Cookman Avenue that has been built up in the last 10 years, which we're still looking at 4 to 5 projects. They're looking now. We need to put in ordinances right now because any of these obligations that we're accruing through credits, we're not being paid for. These are ordinances. These are ordinances that we need to put in for builders' trust that are building market rate and haven't paid for it. We've lost all that money and the city becomes obligated to it. So we need to make sure we get all these factors put in and put in quickly so we maximize an opportunity not to put this burden on the taxpayers of the city. What are you looking at the height on the mixed use on Main Street?
In terms of height, the maximum height right now is, I think, 3 stories. 3 stories. We haven't gotten to that yet in terms of the details.
Okay.
What's your suggestion?
Maybe 4. I'm not. Maybe 4.
Most developers are not going to go above 4 stories.
Yeah,
right?
about 4.
For practical.
Yeah, because they got to put in an elevator and everything. Yeah, so maybe 4. We go 4. Springwood Avenue, which has been talked about. Like I said, that needs to be one of the major issues that needs to be addressed right away, as in what the details and what the structure of that community is going to be economically, so we don't lose people and we start creating jobs for those people in that community. And a full economic plan that looks to, with all the development going on, should be added to creating jobs for these construction jobs that are going on right now, which we haven't trained or gotten anybody ready for. Recycling ordinance. Can we just put in a recycling ordinance? Right now we're paying fees, tipping fees, on every drop of garbage that we're sending out. Neptune has a recycler. We're paying more for something where we can actually be creating credit and money for if we just put the ordinance and get it done. We keep holding back on doing things that make sense and are economically more feasible than the things that we're doing. And the waterfront plans. Can we put zoning regulations for affordable housing into those elements on that waterfront?
In the waterfront redevelopment area?
Yes. Right now, I don't see, right now there is a case constitutionally we can go back to that went through the Supreme Court, but we need to put that into those lots of the city. Yeah, but we need to put those into that plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Malcolm Navius. I'm from Asbury Park, business owner. I just want to know if any of you were aware, but there was an article in the paper the other day where they listed the top 48 bars in Asbury Park, a mile square. They had 48 bars here. I want to know if it's in your redevelopment plan to dig under the street's tunnels so that they can use the license on the opposite side of the street. We have the youngsters, the young guys coming in by the train loads, by the bus loads, by the car loads, and vomiting and defecating and peeing and breaking the windows all down the main district, business district. We want to know if that's going to be in the development plan.
Dave Morton, 5th Avenue. I guess I've been here since 1985. I guess echoing the last 2 gentlemen concerns. My issue is, when is going to be enough is enough? You're talking about building and additional high rises and all these improvements in Memorial Drive, but it has to, at some point, we really got to talk to quality of life and making sure that whether you're old or young, the environment in which you're going to live in, the community that you're going to live in is a wholesome community, and not just simply the buildings. So.
Kara Peterson, Asbury Park resident, about 7 years. The one thing I wasn't sure if the arts and culture section covered, or maybe it needs to also include, and it kind of goes to what we're hearing, larger scale entertainment, because we do get, you know, large concerts that come through here, which are great. Sorry. Like larger scale concerts and the bar, you know, that all the kind of that other type of entertainment. I don't necessarily consider in culture. It's kind of like that different, you know, 1,000 people come through. So just covering some of that stuff.
Hi, thanks for coming. Great presentation. I'm Warner Baumgartner, the city historian. I've been here 39 years, and I've been a staunch advocate of preservation and maintaining the city's character, so I appreciate many of your comments. Some things do concern me, though. I heard comments about gateways. Now, in the past, when gateways were discussed, people were proposing like physical gateways, like arches covering the streets and things like that. I hope that's not what you're proposing. What I'm thinking more along the lines of, that actually was proposed during the last re-examination, and I spoke against that, and I would speak against that now. For the simple fact that my concern is that things be authentic. Asbury Park is extremely unique, extremely historic, and I think that anything that's done needs to be authentic and in character. So greenery, landscaping, the original design that James Bradley, you know, provided for us is certainly one of the key elements. From an economic point of view, I haven't heard much about the beachfront in your presentation, and I understand that, you know, you really can't do much with the current redevelopment plan in terms of this process, but I think that the re-examination report certainly should mention that the waterfront redevelopment plan should be renegotiated and reevaluated. And the reason for that is quite simple. When it was crafted many years ago, nobody considered that Asbury would be a destination again. Asbury basically had been abandoned as far as its heritage by those in planning positions at that point. 3,000 plus condominiums, a city within a city, and that is the plan that is currently still on the books for the beachfront. Now, thankfully, that didn't come to fruition, at least in my opinion. Instead, a holistic approach has happened, and Asbury has returned to a destination. It's gone back to its roots. So the plan now is in conflict with the economic engine that exists down there. And that concerns me greatly, because there are several icons that are left. The Stone Pony is left, the Wonder Bar is left, Convention Hall is somebody, you know, Convention Hall is left, and what remains of the casino is left. And to really follow the existing plan will be a detriment to those icons that are left down there, because they are currently zoned for other uses. In fact, the Pony could be demolished and turned into a condo high-rise. And I don't think anybody would appreciate that and really think that that's in the best interests of Asbury Park. The developer might think it's in his best interests, but that's where the give and take comes from. I think the redevelopment plan is a key element that has not been mentioned in any of this discussion. And you could make recommendations, whether it actually happens or not through negotiations between the redevelopment authority and the developer. That's another thing, but that has to be greatly concerned, that there's a dichotomy between what's happening and evolving on the beachfront versus what's actually on the books as the plan itself, which is by now obsolete, I think. Thank you.
Good comments. To the extent that there are legal ramifications to doing anything like that, we have to explore those. Thank you.
Hi, Louise Murray, Grand Avenue, Asbury Park. I have no recommendations, but I'm going to give you a little insight what I experienced growing up here. My grandmother came here in 1904. I was born and raised here, so I'm probably one of the oldest residents in this whole room, besides living here the longest. Asbury Park, I'm just giving you a little overlay, and maybe you can grab something out of it and say, you know what, maybe we should try that or this or whatever. I grew up here, there was 4 utility companies in Asbury Park. Main Street had every car dealership on it. We had 4, 5 and dimes. I don't know if anybody knows what that is, but we had them. We had department stores on Cookman Avenue. All those stores on Cookman Avenue above were not apartments. They were there for the purpose of keeping their retail there. When they would go over the seasons, you know, they changed their seasons. So maybe there's about 10 of them that I remember as being apartments. I probably walked every street in this city. I was born and raised on the west side of town. Springwood Avenue was the most viable city. I mean, it was like a little city in itself. It had stores on the bottom, and a lot of people lived above the stores on Springwood Avenue. We had a medical arts building that housed a lot of doctors and all of that. 1 block off from Jersey Central, we had Jersey Central Power and Light. We had Bell Telephone that housed 500 women, that they would work around the clock. It was like a fairyland for me. We had buses going in and out of the city all the time. Springwood Avenue down here, we had 4 movie theaters. As far as the beachfront goes, it was just 4 months out of the year. That was it. I don't know why everybody gets all hepped up about the beachfront. I mean, frankly, I can't wait for everybody to leave. I mean, you know, I'm gonna tell you, when it was Beirut and I was on that beach and there was maybe 40 people because nobody would come to Asbury because they were scared to death, I loved it. Now that there's all these people, I'm not so happy with it, I'll tell you right now. And you know, the times have changed because people have no beach etiquette, they have no pride in themselves, and the bottom line is, they measure how much fun they have by how drunk they are. And if they're blasted, and what did you do last time? Oh, I don't remember, but I had the best time. And then I had never, oh, by the way, there was over 100 liquor licenses in this little town of a mile square. I mean, we had jazz clubs, we had this. I mean, I grew up from day one, and then of course I took advantage of the jazz clubs when I was old enough. Nothing, you know, and I mean, we went down to Springwood Avenue, we had our time, and if you can utilize we had light industry on Memorial Drive, and we also have a little, besides, did I mention the 4 grocery stores? Acme, A&P, Grand Union, we had it all in a 1 mile square. And they're saying this is a destination? No, times have changed. Oh, 3 swimming.
Hi, Rita Morano, 8th Avenue. And all the presentations, I didn't hear anything about the Bradley restrictions that we have. And I was wondering if you knew about them to begin with. Did you know about the Bradley restrictions?
I have to be totally honest that it did not come up.
Well, Bradley built this town, and he wasn't even a planner. He was a full of brush man. He had a brush factory, and he built a beautiful town. And there were Bradley restrictions when he passed away that they can never be changed. And yet everybody tries to break the Bradley restrictions. There's so many heirs. I don't know if you know anything about it. There's so many heirs that have to be notified whenever you're going to do something at the beachfront. And I think you should have that in your plan, because the Bradley restrictions take in all the parks and all the lakes and the beachfront. And I think it's very important that you put that in your plan. And as far as the last plan we had for the last 10 years, that's a disaster. You put a beer garden on Cookman Avenue and the lake, 700 people go there and there's no place to park. I mean, these things have to change in this plan, I hope. The master plan, I saw something like, it says work and live in.
Live and work.
Yeah, that's a disaster. We don't have people in this town that control these things. We don't have enough in code enforcement. And on Friday night, they pull down the shade and go home, and that's when everything happens. Everybody breaks the rules. Yeah, I mean, like, that sounds to me, there's some people living on Main Street right now behind the stores. It's not a pretty picture. I lived over my dad's store, and I know what that's about. So, I mean, the Bradley restrictions really have to be put into this plan that you're presenting. And how come you never heard about it? I mean, that's such an important fact. You look on a zoning map or a surveyor's map. Look at Kennedy Park. Right across it, it says Bradley restrictions. Most of the streets are restricted too. But the other thing I wanted to talk about was Springwood Avenue. They got all new sidewalks, all new lights. They got everything new. That's going to get developed. In case anybody thinks it isn't, it is. There's groups that want to come in and build housing. I'm not for more housing, but that's the way it is. It has to be. And I'm not for taller buildings because they block the air. Bradley built those streets wide so that we could get the sea air coming up the streets. And now they want to, you know, like Cookman Avenue now, they're going to build high rises, and they're going to it's like living in a tunnel. And I don't think that's good for the Asbury Park. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
By the way, I'm here 50 years.
Hi, I'm Danny Fiore. I actually live in Ocean Grove, New Jersey, but I'm opening a business in Asbury Park. I'm just wondering, this turnout is amazing, and I'm wondering if there's a committee being formed of the public, or if that's something that's going to be happening as this development happens, because there is so much feedback, and there's all different people here, which is amazing, and that's what everyone wants to keep amazing about this town, is all the different backgrounds and diversity. Will there be some sort of committee that weighs in, or as Derek mentioned, like a coalition that's being formed?
Well, I can explain how this process is going to go. This process is being steered by a steering committee, which is comprised of planning board representatives, business community representatives, governing body representatives. Okay, they're the folks who basically drive us. Okay, they steer us. So we develop the information, we get this public input, and the public's had several opportunities. This is the third community meeting. There'll be 2 planning board meetings at which we'll vet the draft re-examination report. So there's no separate committee. It's really this entity that's been formed to guide this process at this point.
I guess it's interesting that there's already been several meetings, but not, like, the word doesn't get out. Like, no, this is pretty amazing. I'm not sure if the other meetings have this many people in them, but yeah. So, I mean, I feel like maybe the word needs to be spread even wider. I mean, or maybe not. Does that hinder the planning? I don't know. I mean,
just to let you know, the city has been using several outlets to, advertising, web, invitations, personal invitations to various community groups and things like that to get people out.
it just seems like maybe those invitations aren't so well spread out.
Oh, there was a survey.
Okay, thank you so much.
What's your business that you're opening? What's your business?
I'm going to be opening a cookie business that's going to be like a cooking school.
Cool. Cool.
Can I just say one more thing?
Of course.
You have
to go to the microphone.
This, I don't know how to say this. Oh, I think I do. There's like 83 nonprofits in Asbury Park. I think that should be in the plan. They shouldn't be on Main Street. There's some on Main Street right now. And they're all over town. 83 agencies to help the poor. And we still have a high number of poor people. So a lot of these nonprofits benefit themselves. I don't know if you know that. I know it. Just look at Main Street and see the Sisters of Mercy. They started with one building. Now they got 3 buildings and their parking lot. Interfaith Neighbors, we gave them $3 million to build a senior, one floor, a senior building, and they own the rest of it. They get 8 rentals, and they get all the stores rented on the bottom. These are non-profits. This has got to stop. There's too many of them in this town. And I think you should put that in your plan.
Could I indulge one more comment? All right, so something just came to my mind, and that I heard.
This is it.
Okay.
We have to stop for.
I heard no mention of the school system. Why is that? No, I mean in your presentation.
Community facilities.
We go under community facilities?
Community facilities.
Okay, I would like you to put a recommendation in there that the current facilities that the school has be reevaluated in terms of the growing demographic in Asbury Park. Because you talked about recreational facilities and things. They have the biggest recreational facility there that's probably in the near 5 mile or 10 mile area. That field, the track and field facilities, the ballpark there, being under school control limits its use completely. So if the city wants to make use of that, there's going to be some give and take necessary between the school system and the administration in order to fulfill your goals as you've stated them.
And we didn't articulate it, but that's definitely on the agenda. So thanks very much.
I'd like to add one thing, a cautionary note. A cautionary note. And I think I can speak pretty clearly for the folk that look like me that are the majority of this city, black and brown folk. People have been disturbed, disgusted because it took 4 or 5 years for a silly little park to be done, yet luxury high-rises and everything else are being done overnight, literally, on the east side. That disparity cannot continue. The group that's in here now is not representative of the city of Asbury Park.
Thank you.
And we have to talk about this elephant in the room, because this is foulness. I'm just putting it out there. Anybody got an issue with it can see me outside. That's all I need to say, but just keep that in mind, because I'm not going away.
Before everybody goes, I just want to let you know where we are in the process. I explained before, this is our 3rd community meeting. We are going to be now going back with the steering committee to take in all the public input we've had so far. We are going to be drafting a preliminary redevelopment plan, or not redevelopment plan, re-examination report. That re-examination report will be posted publicly prior to a planning board meeting. We're not sure the timing of this yet, but it'll be well advertised. It will be a public meeting. You will have an opportunity to review the report prior to that meeting. You will have an opportunity to comment on it at that meeting. And then subsequent to that meeting, there will be revisions made pursuant to the planning board's recommendations based on the public input. And there will be a subsequent planning board meeting at which presumably the planning board will adopt the re-examination report. And then that should conclude the process. So you will still have opportunities to comment on how we articulate everything we've heard through the lens of the steering committee.